All right, so episode 2. Welcome everyone who's listening. So, all right, you were saying something, Arlen?
Yeah. In our last episode, we introduced ourselves, gave a little bit of background, and you and I had discussed that we wanted to share why we decided to do the podcast.
Right.
And I don't remember that we discussed the why.
Yeah, I don't
And
think so either.
so
Yeah,
we
because
could,
I watched it back through, and it's like, yeah, we didn't hit all the points. So this time I actually have some bullet points like on
sure.
my screen here to make sure that we hit everything.
All right.
But yeah, let's talk about that. That's a good place to start. Actually, it's actually relevant to like the topic for today, I guess. I mean, there's not like a set topic, but I'd like to like start kind of from the beginning, like go back into prehistory and talk about, maybe a little bit about how humans became human. And
Well, that goes back a ways.
yeah, so just get into that a little bit, and then yeah. So, do you want to talk about that first? What you were saying about the purpose of the podcast?
Well, yeah, and while my thoughts are still kind of coalescing, uh, what from your side of it, what's your motive? What's your purpose for? You're putting
Oh,
out more effort on this than I am, so
yeah,
what?
that's not it's not much effort, and it's interesting too. It's like a hobby. So, well,
Yeah,
one, like, I think we have some pretty killer conversations, and we've had a lot of great ones over the last 20 years.
uh-huh,
And it seems like there's like a market for these kind of conversations online through podcasts and YouTubes and stuff like that.
uh-huh,
And I have another YouTube channel with my electric bikes, right? So I started that, and that's really interesting. So I kind of enjoy filming and editing and stuff. So there's
yeah,
that. And another thing is, it's like if I'm committing to doing a podcast, because I'm doing this new thing, everything I commit to, I have to do it for a year. So there's that. And I thought that maybe me and you collaborating on a podcast together would force me into, because I'm always telling myself I need to call you more, I need to call Arlen more.
oh
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And so now this way we're collaborating on something. We're going to make sure we're having our conversations consistently, because you're getting old, and who knows how you might outlive me. Actually, who knows? But right,
yeah,
we don't have that much time left, right?
right,
And
yeah,
yeah, this is a way we can document a lot of our conversations and stuff like that. In a way, I guess, for you to live on symbolically, or have a record of your ideas, something like
yeah.
that, digitally.
Right. Well, and I concur with you on the 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 posterity. My feeling is that I have kind of dedicated my life, the my commitment to myself about being on the planet is to make a difference that matters and to make a contribution. And while it's true that we can't not make a difference, so all I have to do is just be me and I'll make a difference. But I wanted it to be more intentional
Mm.
than that. So I've lived my life very intentionally, and um, as a result of that, I've accumulated a lot of experience that uh, I think is very likely that other people can borrow from my experience. And so capturing that in a form that can be made public um, is kind of what's left. That the phase of my life's work now is sharing with my fellow human beings what I have found out in this fantastic experiment called life. I've always kind of been both the scientist and the guinea pig, and life is the laboratory in which I do these experiments on me as the guinea pig, and then study as me as the scientist.
All right.
And so I've found out a lot of stuff that I think can be very useful to people. And even I think there's some things I've found out that are really crucial to the future of the human race.
Yeah,
So
I think there's two paths ahead of us as like a species. I think, and I think we're at a
yeah,
really critical time in history to where if we keep going down the path we're going down, we're pretty much ensuring our own destruction. And then, you know, there's a lot of choices that need to be made right now, that are going to affect the future of mankind, basically. And a lot of it's, practical, ecological. We have to take care of the environment. We got, climate change, we got destruction of ecosystems. All this pretty much genocide of our fellow species here on the planet, especially amphibians and bees and stuff like that. Like we're going through a mass extinction right now, and this man-made, and that's eventually going to catch up to us. You can only break so many chains or links in the chain.
yeah, right.
Before the whole thing just obliterates.
We're damaging the network,
Right.
the ecological network that supports our existence.
But beneath all that, that will work itself out, I think. But there's some deeper emotional, spiritual issues at play that are manifesting themselves in the destruction of the planet, I think. The existential needs, the need for meaning and purpose. We're in sort of a crazy, disorienting, terrifying, like stage of evolution right now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I wanted to get into today. So that might be a good segue.
All right.
So I just wanted to kind of go back to maybe like before we were human beings, right? When we were still primates. And we're talking about, what triggered, the change. Why did our brains start developing? Why did they get bigger? Why did we start eating meat and stuff like that? And I think there's two theories that I've read, and one is that there was an ecological change where the environment changed suddenly, and the primates couldn't live off of vegetation anymore, and we had to move out into the plains and start hunting animals in order to survive. Right. So that's
right.
The first one.
Hang on.
Sure.
Hang on a second.
Huh?
I want to stick a pin in our conversation at this point and come back. I wanted to back up
All right.
and respond to a comment that I think is very germane, where you said that there's two paths forward, and one of them leads to self-destruction. Maybe it's like that fork in the trail in the jungle, huh? What it leads, to self-destruction, and the other one I assume is an alternative to self-destruction, and I think that currently, right now, we have a very fundamental distinction in ways of being. There are people who are a part of this, what looks to be a self-destructive path, and they're fine with that. They don't know about it, and they're fine about it. They know about it, and they're fine about it. And then, of course, there's always degrees of this, because that certainly includes me. There's plenty of things that I do that contribute to the demise of the ecosystem, where I abuse Mother Earth, to put it in an indigenous concept. But my commitment is to work at doing as least of that harm as possible. And so my point that I wanted to respond to is this kind of a two-path kind of thing, and it reminds me of the Native American story about the youngster asking the elder about something, and the elder said, "Well, it's like there's these two wolves that are fighting. There's the evil wolf and destructive wolf, and the good wolf, the wolf of well-being." And the youngster asks, "Well, which one will win?" And the elder tells the lad, "The one you feed."
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to that we can't not make a difference. And I believe that one of these one of these paths, the path that leads to less destruction, will probably be could very well be the means of survival for our species. We may still die off, but just with having done less harm than if we just stayed committed to the conventional neglect of Mother Earth, and which includes the neglect of our own psychological well-being. So if we're not going to do it for Mother Earth, we could just do it for our own well-being.
Right.
And that will evolve into a theory that we can discuss at another session, that I call the Homo Aquarius. It's another species, just like we've evolved through various species of humans that you're going back prior to.
Right.
But we had Homo erectus. We had well, that's the one I can remember. There's a couple others that are cataloged as being distinct species, different. And I think that there's a fundamental difference between the people who live, that are committed to the optimum well-being to the best of our ability, and we are the possibility that the species will survive because we give our best shot at wholesomeness and well-being rather than just neglect. And so anyway, that's what I wanted to kind of respond to that path that you're the two path thing that you were talking about.
Yeah.
That for me, there's this whole theory of Homo Aquarius, and that if the human race survives, it's going to be because of enough people became a part of this commitment to wholesomeness and well-being, and if there's enough of us committed to that soon enough, then there will be a species, but it probably won't be really the same kind of person, same kind of human being as we've had in the past. And this is all within the scope of the model of evolution.
Right.
So anyway, I've kind of put into our conversation that I wanted to put in. So I'm done rattling around in my cage here.
Right. And I just wanted to set some groundwork so we can sort of talk about in more detail, what the issues are with humanity.
Right.
Why
Yeah,
there seems
right.
to be these like two distinct sort of what you call different species or something like that, the Homo Aquarius, and I think it has to do with people who are comfortable being in possession of their own will versus people who
I think that's exactly
have too much existential guilt and shame in order to be in possession of their will, and they outsource, they transfer their will to authority figures and hierarchies and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
I just want to let me touch on some of these points, and then we can get back.
Right.
Back and
Yeah.
forth.
No. This what I was just saying will come up in our conversation.
Definitely, yeah.
But I was concerned that I might miss it when it comes up again, so I wanted to stick it in. So let's go back to where we stuck a pin in it, and you pick it up from there.
Yeah, so I was just trying to talk about what the theories are about why we started to evolve in the direction we did. Why our skulls got bigger and we were, able to grow the cortex a lot bigger than other animals, and then the advanced structures in the prefrontal cortex that are unique to humans.
So this is kind of evolutionary biology that you're...
Yeah, I wouldn't go that. Just like basic, I'm not a biologist, but from what I've read, there's two theories. One is like there was a change in our environment. We had to move out into the plains because there wasn't enough vegetation to sustain us, and so we had to start eating meat. And the other one is that there was a mutation in the genes responsible for the jaw muscles, right? Because in primates who eat a lot of heavy vegetation, they need really strong jaw muscles to be able to chew that stuff up, right? And their jaws go all the way up and they attach to the back of their skull up here, right? But in human beings, there was a genetic mutation that made the jaw muscles much smaller, right? So we just simply were not physically able to consume enough of that vegetation in order to survive, right? And so out of necessity, we had to find a different food source, which was animals, protein, animal protein. We had to hunt or we probably did some scavenging and hunting and stuff like that, right? But meat is much more nutrient dense than like vegetation is, right? And so when we started eating meat, there's much more nutrients available for the development of the brain. And so we have, like, for whatever reason, either we had to change environments because our environment was destroyed for whatever reason or other. We had that mutation in our jaw that we couldn't eat vegetation. Vegetation very well anymore. So we had to find another food source. It's probably a little bit of everything, I would think. And then we had much more nutrients available to us, which sort of sped up our evolution and our ability to grow larger brains. And then in hunting, we had to problem solve, a lot more than we did when we were living off vegetation. Because if you go, a few million years, everything that we eat in our environment, it's all instinctual. We don't have to learn anything. We don't have to problem solve. We instinctually know that we can eat this plant. This plant is toxic by the way it smells, or something like that, right? Where in a
so we didn't. It was more gather. It wasn't even hunter. It was just gatherer.
Right, just gatherer, and it was all like instinctual. It was all in the genes. It was all encoded and pre-programmed exactly how we were able to live, right? But when you're going through like sudden changes in your own biology or maybe the environment, I'm sure a lot of the species that we came from died off, and only a few of us were able to survive, and those were the ones that had the ability to problem solve. Right? And so we had this need to be able to problem solve, to make tools to hunt. We had to start communicating with each other symbolically in order to cooperate during the hunting process, right? And so that led to the development of like language, like simple languages, right? Coordination, problem solving, and stuff like that. Hold on, I got my points here. Let's see. Yeah, development of precursor society. Oh yeah, so and the cooperation and creating like a hunting society is sort of like, I think what was the earliest precursors to what we call civilized society now. Because in order for us to cooperate, we can't be killing each other over mates and stuff like that, right? And so you have to have some basic rules of civility, like marriage and stuff like that, to where, if I have my wife, she belongs to me, and so there's some social rules and structures involved, so that way we can cooperate enough to go out and get some food to sustain our lives, right?
Yeah, it makes us more proficient in our survival skills if we're not fighting with all these things that are solved with the social order.
Right.
So we create these like master agreements so that we spend less time fighting with each other and competing with each other, and then there's the collaboration and cooperation factor that makes us more proficient, just makes us better at doing whatever it is that we're doing, because of the synergy of cooperation.
Right.
And so what you're explaining here that is informative to me is the kind of an evolutionary explanation for how these things got started as we moved from a purely instinctual to a more cerebral way of surviving.
Right. Out of necessity. So, like, the social thing is minimize conflict and maximize cooperation, right? That's sort of the, like, necessity enforced ethic. So anyways, so there's some changes in how we eat, how we live. We have to cooperate. We have to develop symbolic languages in order to communicate. We have to be able to problem solve, right? We've got this mutation in our jaw muscle, allows for our craniums to grow. The brain is able to grow. We're pretty much getting this new hardware, because that's what our brains are, is basically computers, right? So we're getting this new hardware.
Yeah.
And then the software that's running on that new hardware is new too. I think we call that the ego, right? And so the ego is responsible for problem solving, right? So the limbic system has a need. It's hungry. It needs food. It wants to have sex. It's in danger or something like that. And if there's not that pre-programming within the DNA on how to respond to a certain situations, the limbic system, the rest of the biological system is completely dependent on this new piece of software that's running this ego, this problem-solving mechanism, right?
Right.
So, but it's like with anything, anytime you make adjustments to any system, like if you think about it, from single-cell organisms all the way up to, pre-human primates, talking about billions of years, living instinctually, responding automatically to stimulus in your environment. So it's always stimulus and response. There's no gap between stimulus and response, right? And so,
Right.
But now that we have to problem solve more, we have to be able to adapt quickly and stuff like that. By necessity, we have to be able to delay our responses, right? So there has to be a gap between stimulus and response to try to figure out, how exactly to overcome a problem, or to solve a problem, to get some food, to create some tools, or for hunting and stuff like that, right?
I get it. Yeah, I'm following you.
So, like, anytime you make a change to a system that's been well established, for billions of years, and there's this sudden change to your intelligence and how the animal functions in its environment, there's going to be downstream effects, right? So,
yeah,
right. So, one of, I think there's two. So the first one is just I don't know what you would call it. I think they call the fear of freedom or existential guilt is just the disorientation and the extreme discomfort not being able to reflexively respond to stimuli in your environment, right? Because if your entire organism is geared to be able to be reflexive, and all of a sudden there's this stop gap where the ego is holding off the organism from responding to stimuli, so that way there can be some problem solving mechanisms. There's a fundamental sort of disorientation or angst, or what do they call it? Kierkegaard would call it dread.
I get it. You're in familiar territory for me here about what is the phenomenological event or experience of being in that space between stimulus and response. And until we learn how to navigate that space, how to work with it, even how to form a sense of self, because without a sense of self, then that space between stimulus and response is just a void. It's not automatic. It doesn't just flow, because we have created, at least in our mental reality, we have created a pause, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have, as individuals and then collectively, as a species, we are learning how to work in that space. How to to start with, I think it requires a choice to stop, look, and listen. The whole meditation thing is just being present in that space, and observing the self, not in a reactive state, or you call reflexive.
Right.
Is that's your word?
Yeah.
Reflex, reactive rather than reflective.
Right.
I've got your language there.
Yeah, so it's a reflex, right? Like if you tap your knee, your knee
Yeah,
jumps, right? It's a reflex,
right.
So
So we're learning how, at the individual level, the species is learning how to create that pause and to be reflective rather than reflexive.
Well, I don't know, because we create all these cultural and societal mechanisms that we're able to transfer our will, so we don't have to be in possession of it. We're able to give it to an authority figure. We try to live as reflexive as possible, and so that's where you have these really dogmatic,
exactly.
dedications
And the thing
to
is,
cultural value systems and behaviors and stuff.
the tradition in religion, or at least the religions that I'm familiar with, particularly Christianity, we have a father who's handling all this for us. So we can offload the responsibility for deciding what to do, or at least that's the belief. I don't think it actually works that well. We don't actually offload it. One of the things that marvels me about people of faith is how much they don't turn to their faith. They're very adamant about the absoluteness of their interpretation of things and the basis of their faith, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't see them, trusting in that kind of inner guidance. But the point is that they're trying to not be it's not an absolute. There's a tendency to want to avoid the responsibility for making up your mind. For example, with myself and your mom, my wife, she'll come and she says, "You want chicken or pork chops?" And this actually happens. I actually have an existential momentary crisis because I don't know. I don't give a shit. It's food. Yeah, I want food, but at the level of chicken or pork chops, it doesn't happen. But sometimes, she'll kind of hold my feet to the fire and say, "No, I want you to choose." And it's like, well, what if I make the wrong choice?
Right.
And there is no wrong choice, but existentially within myself, I have that thing that makes it hellish to be in that place of responsible for deciding how I'm going to respond.
Kierkegaard wrote a whole book about that called Concept of Dread, to where he used the Christian story of Adam and Eve and original sin, and he was analyzing it, and he said that Adam and Eve became sinners or became guilty, became full of dread when God gave them the option to either eat the apple or not eat the apple. So they became sinners and guilty before the apple was ever touched. It's having choice, having freedom of choice, having autonomy, and a freedom to make choices that's pretty much pitted against. It's just us running this little subsystem, this little ego software. It's pretty much pitted against the entire sort of nature of the rest of the biological system that we're living in, right? And there's an enormous amount of pressure to live responsively, reflexively, and also the organism wants to return to a state of homeostasis, right?
Yeah.
Right. It wants to get what it needs fulfilled, its needs met. The limbic system just wants to get needs met, right? And then once it's there,
scratch the itch.
Yeah, it goes into homeostasis until some other itch, wakes it up, and then it needs the ego to go out and do something else for it, right?
Right. Are you familiar with Fritz Perls' model of it's a cyclical model? Can't remember the name of it now, but it moves through from homeostasis, contentment, and then a stimulus of some kind happens, and then we mobilize.
Gestalt therapy verbatim or something. Is that the book you're talking about?
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. That was one of the books I turned you on to. Yeah, and it's the model is Gestalt. Gestalt psychology that was the name I was looking for. All right. So anyway, you're familiar with that, and so that's what I'm aligned with that perspective, as in it makes sense to me about how that everything's fine until there's an itch, and then we mobilize to scratch it, and then we come back to that, and that's basically the cycle that we're doing, whether we're doing it strategically or instinctively.
Right.
That's what makes the world go around, right? So, but anyway, let's go back to your process here, your explanation of how we've evolved up to the situation. I guess you've kind of gotten up to where we are now as a species.
Oh, not quite. It gets much more complicated.
Pick it up.
It gets more complicated than that, because now, so we have this space in between stimulus and response, right?
Right.
Now we've had to develop, these more cognitive sort of problem-solving intelligence type skills in order to survive, right? To be able to hunt, to
Right.
communicate. We have the society, that kind of stuff, right? So the problem is we became too smart, right? Because now at some point man becomes aware of his own mortality, right? He understands that he's going to die someday, and everyone he loves is also going to die someday, right?
Right.
And so what happens is that you can see as like pretend like the ego or the cortex is another layer of external reality to the limbic system. Let's just call it the limbic system, right? So like if you can close your eyes and imagine an elephant charging at you, and your limbic system is going to respond. It's not going to be the same as like a real elephant charging you, right? But it responds. Your emotional, instinctual state responds to your own thoughts, right? To your mind.
The instincts don't differentiate between what we imagine, or the symbolic world.
Right.
It doesn't distinguish between that realm and the physical, objective reality. The real elephant charging at us.
Right.
There's a strong similarity in how the limbic system reacts to the stimulus.
Yeah, and so what that does, it creates a constant source, a stream, you can call it, of existential anxiety, right? Because now the limbic system is getting this sense of doom and dread, this sense of anxiety, because it wants to live. It wants to protect itself, to avoid danger, to avoid death, right? And now that our intelligence comes to understand that we're going to die someday and there's no way to avoid it, really, it creates a constant state of anxiety. That anxiety then fuels the ego, right? Because it fuels it. It reinforces the development of the intelligence and the ego, right? Because now we have a new problem we have to solve. The limbic system has a need, right? And that need was created because of our evolved intelligence, and we got our evolved intelligence because of we changing environmental situations and mutations or whatever, right? And so now it just goes a little further, so that process gets supercharged and reinforced even more, because now we have this new need for immortality, basically, right?
Right. Yeah.
We have to overcome, death anxiety. We have to overcome this triggering, the subtle triggering of the fight or flight mechanism within the limbic system, right? And so we have this sort of like this pushback between, being uncomfortable with that space between stimulus and response. We want to return to homeostasis and live reflexively. Meanwhile, we have this constant state of triggering of our ego and our cognitive abilities, to try to figure out a way. So how do we overcome death, right? And so this now you can see, like, culture is to like our existential needs as society is to our physical needs, right? And so,
all right, hang on. Restate that again.
So with this new need to overcome death, right, to obtain immortality, to appease the limbic system's, trigger,
right?
We have to create a framework in our minds, in a symbolic framework, to where death ceases to be a thing that exists, right? Immortality is possible, right?
Such as believing that we don't die, that we go to heaven, or we're reincarnated or whatever.
Right.
But that's a symbolic system. This is a question. I'm checking in to see if I get what you're saying. It is a symbolic system in which then our instinctual part of us responds to those symbols of immortality as though we're going to live on forever.
Right.
So that can settle that existential angst about mortality.
Yeah, because if we convince ourselves as egos that death doesn't really exist, in turn, that will reduce the anxiety about death with the limbic system, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and this reminds me of one of the things about superstition that's very important is that it works.
yeah,
It might be person might consider it superstitious that we believe that we're going to live eternally, right? And that might be superstition, but it still gets the job done.
right. It's there for a reason. It has a
It has a function,
yeah.
right?
So it gets a little bit more complicated than that too, because so now we got the fear of freedom, right? You call it existential guilt. We have existential anxiety, which is the fear of death, right? And then we have something even stranger that happens in that if you look at our biological system is so like our bodies are robots, right? Our machines, and our brains are computers that run the machine, right?
Right.
So we've evolved this new set of hardware in order to be able to quickly adapt to environmental change and to problem solve, which causes all this other problems with existential guilt and anxiety and stuff like that. But somewhere along the line, this subroutine that's running that we call ego has become self-aware, right?
Right.
So it becomes it's able to reflect on itself. It can take itself as a subject, right?
Back to the
as
scientist and the guinea pig.
Yeah, it's a subject and object simultaneously, right? And so it's like you have the very first instance of artificial intelligence, but it's natural intelligence, right? Because we have it's not even the entire software system. It's only a subroutine running on a broader system that has become self-aware, and we are stuck. I am this ego, which is a problem-solving subroutine running on the system, and I have become self-aware. I have a sense of identity, a sense of self that is separate from the rest of the biological system that I am trapped in, right?
Right.
And so you have like broader questions about the meaning of life, my purpose outside of being a slave to my limbic system. Like we have a sense of creativity. We have curiosity about the world. We have these feelings of like love and all these things that seem to be uniquely human. I think are a result of having this AI or natural intelligence, this self-reflective subroutine.
Yeah, like it's NI.
Yeah, natural intelligence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that leads to another, where we want to, I think most of us want to gain independence from the rest of the system, right? We want.
Now hang on. We want independence from the rest of the system, as in my own internal system.
The biology.
I want to be liberated from my biology.
Right. And so at this point, can I show this picture here? And I think this is I'm going to switch to hang on here for a second. I got to switch that over there. And so that's where this picture comes into play, right? So if you look at it, it's a centaur, right? It's a female, but you see how she's stretching? She's trying to extricate herself from her own animality, right? And she's almost out too. Look, she's stretching towards the sun. She's trying to escape from her own animal body and be liberated from the constraints of her own biology. I think this is maybe the most beautiful piece of art I've ever seen, because that, in my opinion, encapsulates the human condition perfectly right there. You know what I mean?
One, I don't think it can be done. There are people who, insist that they're doing it, but, just kind of hang around and watch, and you'll see that, their animal nature stays there. It's kind of like the ego. There's this, get rid of the ego. The ego is the enemy, which is the ego self-loathing, in my opinion. But I've done a lot of work with myself, back to the laboratory of life, and experimenting on myself about letting go of trying to get rid of my natural nature and to become more integrated, so that my symbolic existence and my intelligence and all of that, uh, we could call it modern man, right? That there be harmony between the two. It reminds me of a story told by Joseph Campbell when he was talking with, might have been the Dalai Lama, but one of the great teachers, and they were discussing Western religion, Christianity in particular, I think. But he says, man against nature, nature against man, God against nature, nature against God, God against man, man against God. Very strange religion, quoting pretty closely to quoting what Joseph Campbell quoted this person as saying. And that was a moment of illumination for me. It's like, yeah, that really sums up what's going on, is that we have this enmity between the absolute truth that we are a piece of biology floating in space, right? Mm-hmm. And without that biology, there wouldn't be much symbolism, I'm pretty sure. I don't know that I can create a symbolic reality without my nervous system, without my neurology.
Right.
And yet, I'm using that. Me as a speck of biology is using my ability to be self-aware and my ability to create a symbolic representation of my own existence. And I'm using that to some degree, quite willfully, to some degree, even knowingly, to create an enmity between two absolute aspects, absolute truth of my existence. As a cerebral thinking being, and then also as a natural piece of biology. And I have this internal conflict. And I think there's a lot of mental health issues that come out of that being unresolved. And I think a lot of the people walking around on the streets having conversations with people who aren't there is kind of schizophrenia I'm talking about, is the natural consequences of that kind of schism between the human nature, the nature part of human beingness, and the thinking part of a human beingness. That the thinking part has declared war, certainly denial, and we don't have anything in our social order that's helping us. Well, things aren't that absolute, but we don't have a prevalent feature in our social structure that is guiding people to resolve that existential crisis. Right. That is the conflict between the nature and the symbolic part of ourselves. It's a very
primitive response, right? Because,
which is the primitive response?
All the symbolism, right? The cultural symbolism, the symbolic representation of your own ego and identity and stuff like that. But the reality is the problem, right?
It's still primitive. That response,
of course,
is it's way advanced of where we were in the trees, but relatively speaking to what it needs to be, it's still very undeveloped. It's still very primitive.
Well, if you think about what it is reality is the issue, right? And the reality is we're all going to die someday, right? And so that's the issue. And so the instinct is the solution is to change reality, to purposefully go insane, right?
To detach from reality,
to make reality something that it's not. And so, like, if you took
back to the schizophrenia, this is a consensus schizophrenia.
Yeah, because we're all like eyeballs deep in symbolism, right? And like when we laugh or respond to this sentiment, or if we see like a throne, a fancy chair, we respond differently than if we see like an old junky chair like that's in the alley, even though they serve the same function, right? And so like our entire reality is painted in like in meaning systems and value and culture and stuff like that.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
all
Meaning.
off the rocker. We're totally insane.
You said meaning.
Meaning, yeah.
As in meaning and significance.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I have a quick story here that might be kind of interesting, and add some appealing texture to our conversation for those that are viewing. I was sitting in the living room, sitting on the couch, kind of meditating. This would have been back in 63, 64, 65. And I have these questions that come to me from time to time. Well, actually pretty regularly, but still on random. But the question was, all right, so we have 3 dimensions to reality, height, width, and depth. And that's what defines a physical reality. But is there a 4th dimension? And if there is a 4th dimension, what is it? And then the light bulb went on, and I recognized that the coffee table in front of me was more than just a thing of height, width, and depth, of physical dimension. It had meaning and significance, and that was a significant part of the reality that we live in, is the meaning and significance that comes to us by way of context. And so that was my very first encounter with what I call the 4th dimension, that I think you just put a different name on it, which is the symbolic aspect of reality. And that a lot of the time, a lot of us have our awareness, we're cognizant only of our symbolic reality. We're not aware of the larger non-symbolic reality, which would be more of an absolute reality, such as water's wet and rocks are hard, kind of thing. But anyway, so that was my own personal sort of mystical experience or insight into what I call the 4th dimension, that I think the symbolic reality is probably a more conventional term.
Or like the cultural framework, I think is a good one.
Yeah. And, but there's a there that's there, and time and time again, that this is, I keep coming back to, or it keeps coming back to me, that this 4th dimension, the role that the 4th dimension plays in the way we interact with reality, and how confining that can be. Once we adopt a belief let's go back to the Adam and Eve thing, and one of the early, as the story goes, one of the early adoptions of symbolic reality was good and evil, and that was the tree that separated them from God, was eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, according to that myth, so, but that's symbolic. That everything just is. It doesn't mean anything. It just is. The truth doesn't mean anything. It just is. So that was the beginning. And we have that today, where almost everything we encounter will be put into one of 3 contexts. It should be, it shouldn't be, or it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And so we pretty well live our lives according to what should be and shouldn't be or doesn't matter, in pretty much complete disregard for the isness of what is, just the nature of what already is. That's how I see all these pieces kind of converging to create a mental, to create symbolic reality of what the hell's going on.
Right, and like reality, even not just the reality is terrifying, right? And things like mortality exist and death and stuff like that. But it's just, if you think about, we're still, staring through like a 10-foot straw at this point in terms of our level of consciousness.
Very
right?
myopic.
Right, and if you think about just how grand and how terrifying and beautiful and awe-striking the world is, right? Reality is in itself. It's way too much for the organism to be able to handle, right? We need to cut ourselves off from reality, from just the grandness of the universe, in order to be able to function in our daily lives, right? And so man escapes from reality. Man escapes from his own personal freedom. But there's one other the piece to this, So we've got the fear of feeling. We got existential guilt. We've got the constant death anxiety that we're having to deal with. We have this impossible situation of being an autonomous and self-aware subsystem existing in this broader biological computer and mechanical system, right? And then finally we have despair, because all of what we're trying to do to deny death, to gain some sort of autonomy outside of this biological system that's decaying and dying, it's futile, right? And we know that. We deny
the natural system is futile.
Trying to fight it is futile.
Oh, well, that's futile too.
Right. And so the last result, we have despair, right? So we have guilt, we have anxiety, we have despair, right?
So are these progressions like stages of consciousness or stages of awareness that we might evolve through? Is that?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is like just set like what are the motivations that we can use to explain different social phenomena and stuff like that as we talk about them in the future in our videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we can come back to this as sort of the foundation, and we can sort of. This is a framework
that you're laying down.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a conceptual framework. Sure.
Right.
So again, it's using symbolism deliberately to explore symbolism, and in some cases maybe come up with a more functional symbolic reality.
Yeah, but you can use symbolism to accurately represent reality too, to communicate it.
It can be accurate. It's
not all about delusion.
Yeah, it's like the Pope one time was asked about the scriptures being fallible. And he said, well, no, the scriptures are not fallible, but the interpretation of them is.
Right.
So it's like the symbolism is necessarily an interpretation of reality, I think. Is that consistent with your thinking? That symbolism is a representation that's based on an interpretation of we have an experience, and then we create these constructs or symbols, concepts, ideas, beliefs.
Otto talks about that actually in this book right here.
Yeah.
This is like for anyone who wants. Yeah, this is the most brilliant book ever written on man, in my opinion. So, the creative urge and personality development, art and artists, right? So, so in this book, he has something called the magic word, basically, right? It's like, so to give like a really like, I'm trying to think of a practical example. Say like you've got these kids walking around. You might be too old to care, but say like they're when emo first came out, you got these kids. They're like dressed in all like black, and they got the makeup on and stuff like that. It's like when something new gets presented to you in your reality, the ambiguity causes angst, right? Like you don't know what that is. Who are they? Why are they dressed like that? And something like that. And there's something very, very anxiety buffering,
unsettling,
anxiety buffering by having a label. Okay. Oh, those are emo people. Emo. Yeah. Okay, I have a word for it now. I have a label, a symbol to represent them. We create a name.
Yeah, we create a name or a symbol for it, and now we think we know something.
Right. It relieves anxiety, and so. What he calls the magic word is like as we're developing language, because it's a dual evolution of language. One's cultural and one's societal. We need to cooperate in order to survive and problem solve to get meat and all this kind of shit. And now we got this whole other task, that's thrown at us with all our existential crap, right? But but naming things in your reality, it starts with naming the different parts of your body, right? And I think a lot of it has like cosmic significance. I can't remember the whole book, but basically, in the naming and providing a symbol for everything that exists in your reality, as a way of
Yeah.
recreating the reality symbolically and conquering it, and thus like reducing the ambiguity anxiety about the world.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it reduces the vastness of it, but it enhances our ability to navigate the vastness.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because symbolism in language first evolved very practically, right? To
Yeah,
communicate, to problem solve, to hunt, to get food, and that kind of thing. Right?
right.
Yeah.
And probably kept those symbols pretty close to what they represented. They were probably pretty accurate symbols.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
Whereas now we have a lot of symbols about symbols that are symbols about other symbols. We make up concepts and words about concepts and words.
yeah. We have so many different conflicting. We're motivations, right? The need to. Well, I don't know how far we want to get into it now. I kind of for this episode, I just kind of wanted to lay that foundation, and
Yeah.
then we can like
Okay.
talk about our response to that. Okay, get deeper into the solution about symbolic immortality. We can get into like religion. How where toxic leaders come from, the hero's
Yeah.
journey, even as it relates to being in possession of our own personal will. What real
Yeah.
masculinity is. Right?
Yeah.
Thinking for yourself, possessing your own will,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is where the rubber meets the road kind of thing. Or I think that philosophically, there's a question. I'm an applied philosopher, and so for me, all this thinking and sorting out and organizing, it has one primary merit, and that is that it contributes to answering the question, how then shall I live? Not me just personally, but my fellow human beings, that
Right.
it might contribute. I said earlier that I wanted to do something with my life that made a difference that matters. And what matters is for people to answer that question, how the fuck then do I survive? Or how do I live? How do I thrive? What the hell do I do with myself? Okay, here's all the symbols, all the naming, all the ideas, and all this stuff, right? So friggin' what?
I think there's an answer to that, though.
How do I live my life?
Yeah.
To me, that is the unifying question that every human being is answering, really pretty much moment by moment. They're either answering it by doing the answer to how do I live my life, or they're doing it by reflecting, discussing, maybe journaling about how then should I live. And so that's what you've gotten to in our conversation now. It seemed like is that it kind of crossed reality with that question of, so what? How then do we?
Well,
how then shall I live?
I think a lot of people have transferred enough of their will where they don't have enough personal autonomy and willpower to sort of, not be a slave to their own impulses and limbic system, right?
And by
So I don't think they're thinking about what you just said. I think that they're busy responding to whatever new stimulus is coming from the limbic system and constantly trying to satisfy their impulses and overcome anxiety and guilt and all this kind of stuff.
So here's the next thing that comes up on kind of a network of ideas, and different ones pop in. Is that so we have the philosophical question, how then shall I live? And to me, the purpose of philosophy is to help people answer that question for themselves. But there's it was starting to form, and I outran it. One of the things personally for myself that my frontier, what I'm learning, the guinea pig is learning. I'm studying what the guinea pig is learning in the maze. It is a thing I call running past my truth. It's like I think too fast, and so then I'll have an idea, and I'll outrun the idea before it becomes concrete enough for me to get a hold of it and use it. And that's what just now happened. But let's go then back to where you were with your response to my comment about. Oh yeah, you were saying that from your perspective, it looks like most people are not, or a lot of people are not asking that question, and I would say yes, the cognitive part of that, they're not consciously discussing that question with themselves because they have they've given their will over to this external authority, and back to the, God tells me what to do kind of thing. That, but so I'd say that I would agree that they're not consciously asking that question. They're asking the question, what does God want me to do? That becomes the equivalent question. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, they are living their answer to that question. How then shall I live? And for the person who's transferred their will to some external authority, to God or to an institution or whatever, their part of their answer to how then shall I live is I will give my will away, and then I won't be responsible because I'll be following somebody, a higher directive, someone with greater authority than me will be telling me what to do. And I won't have to recognize that that's just me being projected out there. I'm just projecting myself onto whatever this other authority is, Right. But so what I'm trying to put into words here, and I don't know how well I'm doing, is that question is a relevant question whether we're consciously thinking about it or just simply doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think doing the answer to that question is unavoidable. We're in a constant state of responding.
Right.
And what you're bringing here in kind of our purpose for our blog, it is to kind of open up that space between stimulus response and learn how to be awake in that void and deal with all of the angst that shows up in that place. It takes a lot of courage
to
sit,
be independent
sit there
and think for yourself. Yeah.
Think for yourself and not have a ready-made answer.
Right.
Because even if I'm drawing from my own inventory as what you would say as symbols, right? But I have an inventory of beliefs about what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's a paint by numbers. I don't have to figure out how to get the petal on the rose to look real. I'll just put the different colors in the different sections and it'll give me a rose petal. And eventually I'll have the whole rose. But I'm working off, even if I'm working off of my inventory of preconceived notions about, how to respond to things, or I'm taking it out of a book, I'm taking it out of philosophy, I'm taking it from my parents, or in some cases my children, or whatever. My spouse, I do that a lot, where I just, I don't have to worry about thinking for myself, and I might make a mistake if I just go along to get along. Now it's not my fault.
Yeah, everything's outsourced.
But I'm still. The thing is I've learned though that I'm still the responder. I'm still responsible because I'm responding.
Yeah, you have agency whether you like it or not. Yeah.
The agency is there. There's a really great line in one of the songs by Rush, and it says something to the effect that even when you choose not to choose, you're still making a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are the chooser. We can't get away from the absolute reality that it is me as an individual responding. Now, how I respond might be to give my will away, and then I don't have to bear the issue of, the responsibility, but that's an illusion. I'm still responsible because I'm the one that chose.
Yeah, Ernest Becker talks about how people transfer their will to authority figures and have it served back to them in manageable helpings. Is what he says.
I think that's a really good symbolic way of looking at what's going on.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty accurate. And if our viewers can catch on to how this stuff is for them in their own life in some little way, that some little insight about, oh, okay, I can see how I'm this and that, or whatever, that enhances their ability. Well, I would say their agency. If it enhances their agency, it enhances their ability to make choices that serve their well-being, then we will have made a difference that matters. It would certainly matter to that person who gets that little insight. And then here's the other thing. As a social change agent, which I have to say I don't attribute myself to having had much of an impact as a social change agent, but I still like the symbol or the idea of having some kind of social impact on a healthier, more wholesome social norms, system of social norms. Each individual person who gets an insight that serves them in a more healthy and wholesome way now becomes a little bit more available to do that for their fellow man. And that's where the society, because society is just the aggregate of individual people making individual choices and how we impact each other, one-on-one. So there's kind of a global, big picture view of this whole thing for me that I'm sharing.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to your original question, is why we're doing this podcast. I guess that's kind of it for me. For a long time, I guess I've thought about I tried to make YouTube videos in the past, but I always feel like, well, I don't know anything. Right? It's like the more I learn, the more I realize how stupid I really am and how little I actually know. Whether or not, if I have anything that's to share that would actually benefit anyone or not. Right? And
I share that with you, Jason.
But I have the intention. My intention is to, try to have a net positive impact on the world. And a lot of the work I did before, and all the social work stuff I did with prisoners, and refugees, all kind of stuff. That I feel like I made an imprint that way. But I feel like I have a lot of stuff to share. I don't know how useful it's going to be, but my intention is that hopefully it's a benefit to someone for some reason.
I think intention, which is another human attribute that I've done a fair amount of study. If I was a writer, one of the books I would have written before now would have been The Power of Intention. Somebody else has already written that book, but the content would have been very different. But the point is intention is a fundamentally powerful thing in our psyche. And it organizes the rest of what makes up who we are, becomes organized by our intention. Intention informs our intuition. It gives our intuition the basis of knowing where to put the myopic view, so we get to the stuff that matters. Intention will define our value system in many ways, because it establishes what's important is our intention. So we are clear on what our intention is, and we're leveraging, we might say, the first law of intention is what I just attempted to put into words there. And so we're coming from the intention to make a difference that matters, but it's not based on how much we know or don't know. In fact, it's kind of like the information that we have is just information. Some of it will be useful to some people. Most of it will be useless to most people at any given moment.
Right.
And I say this but for sure it's the first person, for myself, because on a daily basis, I visit that place you just shared about, but I don't know anything. I don't know anything that would necessarily be of value. And I at 80 years old, I'm done doing the long runs off of short piers. Believing that I've got something, I'm going to put it together, and it's going to make this big difference, and then it's nada. It just doesn't go anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody benefited from it. I can't not make a difference, but I'm not making the kind of difference that I want to make. So now I'm in a place where, partly because I just don't have the energy to be wasting it anymore, but the other is that I'm aware of the fact that I don't have a franchise on what people need to know. I might even know it, but I don't know what they need to know.
I think most of our.
But I'm not satisfied. I'm content with my life, and if I didn't share one tidbit of insight to anybody ever again in my life, I would still be content, but I wouldn't be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
There's this perpetual itch, and so our blog, we're really getting down to the nitty gritty here on what the blog is for me. Is that, well, this
Podcast,
might phrase it up. Podcast, yeah. Thank you. I need the reminders. For me, there are only paths that make a difference, or paths that might make a difference. I have to sense or feel in the visceral, the passion that it might make a difference. So with you and I, it makes a difference for you and it makes a difference for me. So we have an immediate payoff. These conversations are worth having, right? Mm-hmm. But then we record them and make them available to other people. That is, it might make a difference.
Yeah.
But I don't have to pretend like I know something that I don't know. I don't have to deliver. I show up and be me with what I've accumulated. You show up and be you with what you've accumulated. And then the rest of it kind of finds its own way.
Right. I do feel very hopeful though about humanity though. For myself and everyone. I think we can get through this stage of uncomfortable stage of human evolution. I think science has given us some great tools, especially, let's see, I would say the work of the guys, the terror management theory guys, Sheldon Sullivan, Jeff Greenberg, Tom Pazinski. Those are the guys who kind of took Ernest Becker's work and they published in the Journal of Social Psychology. Experimental social psychologists. I forget journalists, but yeah, there's that. There's a lot of really cool research going on at Stanford. They have I think it's called the Institute of Altruism. I forget what the exact thing. Maybe I can.
Yeah, actually, I've had some personal encounter with Dr. Doty by email.
What's his first name?
But he's the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and
Altruistic Studies or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I forget what the acronym stands for, but at Stanford. Yeah, we had some quotes from Dr. Doty in our book, and I had to get permission from him to use his material. And so that's given me an opportunity to become more familiar with him and his work. And so, continue from there that this is a very powerful institution that's doing empirical research on
what makes people happy.
And it'd be the power of compassion.
Yeah.
And what compassion does to the nervous system.
Yeah.
Is
really
remarkable.
Mind and Life Foundation, I think it's called. The Mind and Life.
Uh-huh.
That's where these scientists, it's like those guys from Stanford. I forget their names, but they get together with the Dalai Lama every 2 years, and they have this big, I don't know, call it a symposium or something like that. But all these different scientists, they talk to the Dalai Lama, and they talk about the similarities between like Buddhist philosophy what they're finding out about cognitive psychology and different things like that. They even get into like quantum
Yeah.
physics and stuff, but it's really interesting. But I think it's pretty amazing too. So I'm not religious at all, but I am spiritual. But I think in the end, I think the Christians had it right in this sense that there's only Christ is the only true way to salvation, right? I think that's true. I think Christ is the only true way to salvation, and maybe we'll explain that in another episode. But I think that's what's it called? Controversial. I don't know. Whatever. But I'm not Christian.
Yeah.
But I think they're probably right.
Well, are you familiar? Are you familiar with C.S. Lewis's work?
No.
Yeah. He would. You're paraphrasing some of the things I've heard people say that he said. He's what is called a Christian apologist. He's the one that puts reason behind the whole Christian theology and belief. The thing of it is, though, is there's such a wide range of primary intention that's called Christianity. That the spectrum goes all the way from the exact opposite of what Jesus's teachings were to things that are still holding on to love thy neighbor.
Right, and there's Ernest Becker made a really good point. I think it was in Denial of Death, either in Denial of Death or Escape or Evil. I can't remember where. About I think that the Christian ethic sort of laying the foundation for the Enlightenment in Western democratic sort of like principles and stuff like that.
Well, I have my own rationale on the power of the reasonableness of the redemptive function of Christianity and how it plays into what we've talked about here so far in terms of using symbols to mitigate the impact of previous symbols, and the whole concept of being separated from God, is that's a symbol. But meanwhile, for those who the theology is that God is all present, well, then we could never be separated from God. But we can sure experience, because of the symbolism of good and evil, and how we don't measure up to those criteria that we create for ourselves, and we symbolize God as being, to hate sin. And we're committing it, then the only reasonable conclusion to come to is that we're now separated from God. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, if God is everywhere, we're never separated from God. And so how do we get from that separated place back to being where we experience oneness with the Creator, with the source, with the universe, whatever words we want to use there? How do we get to where we don't experience being separated, even though in the reality we aren't separated? So how do we correct that? Well, that's the great redemption, that the whole salvation and by faith, believing in the salvation is all symbols that can undo what the previous symbols had created. So I managed to come up with a fairly good synopsis of how I see the functionality of Christianity. But that would only be the Christianity that has the intention of love thy neighbor, because without the self-love that can lead to loving the neighbor, it says love thy neighbor as thyself. So that's a mutuality kind of thing. And without that deep care and concern for mutual well-being, then all the rest of it isn't, the enlightenment isn't going to happen, in my opinion. So anyway, that's a little another tangent. So we've crossed realities here with what could be the next probably 10 or 12 episodes.
Right. So maybe we'll let your phone be the cue to wrap this up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, because we got an hour and a half into here, and Tammy's waiting for lunch. So.
All right. All right. Well, good. That was a good conversation. And then
All right.
we'll yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for watching. Like, subscribe, especially subscribe. It helps our channel grow. And we'll see you next week. So we should be releasing these once a week, probably on Sunday, either Saturday night or Sunday. They'll be released to YouTube. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to explore possibilities. And if we get the feedback from people, we'll find out what some of those possibilities are.
Yeah, we really need feedback. So leave some comments in the description, what you like, what you don't like. You know, we're both, we're new at this. We just started podcasting, so it's a skill you develop over time. And, having some sort of constructive criticism or feedback would be really helpful.
Yeah. And my sign off is just remember one thing, and that is do what your love would do.
All right. I don't have a sign off. I'll say bye.
All right. Bye,
All right,
everybody.